the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. My name is Brian Wallace, and I am the MS Michigan Man 64. The MS Michigan Man 64 podcast is about chronic disease awareness. I have had multiple sclerosis for the last 27 years. It's an invisible chronic disease that I've been battling for half of my life. I want to share with you what it is like living with the chronic disease from my experiences and the experiences of other chronic disease warriors. We can fight to have a voice to those that want to listen. Together, we can motivate and educate. Hi, and welcome to the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. So today I am sitting down with another MS warrior like myself. She was diagnosed in 1999 from the state of North Carolina. How are you doing today, Brenna?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing all right. So, Brenna, you are a multiple sclerosis long hauler like me, I guess, and you got diagnosed in 1999. Take us through the path of how you got diagnosed, what was happening, what kind of symptoms you were facing before your diagnosis, and what led up to it.
Sure. I had gotten married the year before and started a new job. I'd moved back to North Carolina. I had a career in Atlanta, and my husband lived in North Carolina, so we drove back and forth every week. But then I took a full-time job in North Carolina, and I was standing in one of my coworkers' offices one day talking, and I noticed that my fingertips on my left hand, just the top joint of each finger on my left hand, was asleep. And I was like, oh, my fingertips are asleep. And he was like, that's weird. And I was like, now that I say it, my toes on my left foot are asleep too. He goes, wow, you must have been sitting funny. I was like, yeah. And I was kind of racking my brain trying to think of how I was sitting. And so that was on a Thursday. On Friday, my husband and I had decided to go down to Atlanta to visit friends and to go to a motorcycle race. And somewhere on Friday, it was like my body was split in half and the whole left side was completely asleep. The whole right side was awake. And Saturday when we were at the motorcycle race, I was still talking about how weird it was, how it just was so unnerving. And he was like, something's wrong. I'm like, obviously something's wrong because this isn't from sitting funny,
Yeah.
And he kind of pinched one of my fingers when we were at the race really hard, and I couldn't even feel it. And he's like, you need to get to the doctor. And I was like, yeah, I think so. And so it was that way the whole weekend, the whole way back from Atlanta, which was 5 hours. But Monday morning, I went to the doctor, but I went to my PCP was out. And so I went to one of his partners, and that man asked me if I recognized that my face was sagging on the left side. And I was like, no. He said, you couldn't tell when you put your makeup on? I was like, no, not at all. He's like, I think you've had a stroke. So let's do blood work and go home for a week. See how your hand and leg feel, and then we'll know by then if you've had a stroke. And I was like, what? I turned 26 like the week before this.
So let me ask you this, Brenna.
Sure.
Did they do an MRI right away? I mean, if you had a stroke,
yeah.
Didn't they say like, oh my God, we're going to check and see if anything happened with her brain?
Right. Well, this guy did not. This guy just said, keep a journal for a week. And so I got home from that appointment, and I was called him back, and I was like, is there any way I could have a referral to a neurologist? Because I just turned 26 a week ago. And if this isn't a stroke, what if I'm about to have a stroke? Like, shouldn't we not wait? Like, I just was freaking out a little bit.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So
that's a good idea.
Within a couple of days, I went to see a neurologist, and the neurologist, I guess he knew right away, but, he had me do probably stuff you've gone through, like almost like a drinking and driving test, like stand on one foot, touch your nose. But like on one foot, I fell over. I did gymnastics my whole life, and I can't stand on one foot. Like it just was crazy.
Right.
So that's what started the testing. And then I, had an MRI, spinal tap, and an EEG.
And everything came back and pointed to multiple sclerosis.
Absolutely, yep.
So they diagnosed you with a relapse remit?
They did, and I was relapse remit for, many years.
Many years.
And a couple of years ago, so I've had this since 99, I would say in 2022 is probably when they switched my diagnosis to secondary progressive. So that's what I am now.
So when you got diagnosed back in 99, what was the DMT that they put you on?
They put me on beta serin, and I was on beta serin for several years, and it worked really well until it didn't. I mean, I stayed on it for quite a while, and there was not that much out when I got diagnosed, as you know, because you were diagnosed about the same time.
Yeah.
So I was on beta serin, but then the pills came out.
Mm-hmm.
And so he asked me, do you want to switch to a pill? And I'm like, no, this works fine. And so I stayed on beta serin, even though there were pills available. I didn't want to do shots anymore, but it was working. So I stuck with it. Then I started having lesions show up on my MRI, and I started having some progression. And so we came off of that. And I think I went on Gilenya first. Then I've been on 9 different DMTs.
Oh, wow. Wow, you got me beat. You got me beat. I think I've been on about 4 or 5 different ones in my 27 years. Wow.
Yeah, I'm only like double you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So when you first got diagnosed and you got that the words multiple sclerosis, how did that affect you mentally? I mean, how did you handle that mentally? You said that you were engaged, or you were just married. I mean, I had just gotten married. I got married the year. Yeah, how did that affect all?
March 7th of 98. I didn't mean to talk over you. March 7th of 98, and I got diagnosed with MS March 1st of 99. Okay. So it was literally like a year into my marriage. And when I came in the room, my neurologist actually took me to do the MRI straight from his office, and he had posted picture images on the light and had circled the lesions on my brain in big red circles. And I'll never forget the feeling when I walked in the room and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. I have to go tell my new husband that I'm dying. And I was so upset, and I was like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to tell him.
Yeah.
And so then my neurologist started talking about multiple sclerosis. He talked about it for about an hour, and then he said, or it could be encephalitis or a bacterial infection. But he only talked about MS, so I figured that's what he thought it was.
Yeah.
And so when he finished talking, I was like, so am I Jerry's kid? He's like, no, that's muscular dystrophy. I was like, I didn't know anybody with MS, nobody. Mm-hmm. And so he explained it to me, and I was like, wait, so I'm not dying? He's like, no. I said, so none of this means I'm dying? He's like, no. I was like, oh, you can tell me anything. I don't care now. Because I was so relieved not to have to tell my husband that. And I never cried and never got upset. I was just so happy that I wasn't dying at 26.
Yeah. And I was the same age as you. I was like 26, 27. And, it was I didn't know what MS was. And and we didn't have the internet back then. And, it was a very scary, you got this chronic disease. You're never going to get rid of it. And here you go. Yep. And you don't, they didn't tell us anything. We just kind of lived and learned on our own.
Yeah. And I don't know I know when I first got diagnosed, they said, we think we're within 5 years of a cure. And I was like, sweet, that's nothing. Yeah. Well, that was a long time ago.
Yeah. 27 years ago.
There's obviously been progress in medicines and, testing and stuff like that, but no cure. They still don't know what causes it. And I'm okay. I'm okay not knowing. I don't need to know. I mean, I know I have it for a reason, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I just try to manage it the best I can.
Yeah. And it's just figuring out. I know when I first got diagnosed back in 97, it was scary, but it was something that it was almost like you go into a fight mode when you, after that diagnosis, because then you start learning about it, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm only 27 years old. I'm not going to just lay down and
Oh,
basically
no.
die.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
and you got to figure out ways to fight this disease and keep on going.
Absolutely. I
And
mean, for me, oh, go ahead. I'm
no,
sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for me, I was extremely active. I told you I did gymnastics. I was a cheerleader, dancer, and then my husband and we got engaged on top of a mountain. We hiked a different mountain on our honeymoon. So I didn't want any of that to change. I wanted to work full time still. I wanted to be outdoors as much as possible and active.
Yeah.
And so once I realized if I learn about it and I keep learning, then I'm not as scared.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to really just stay up on education with it more than anything. I mean, I personally trust the Lord, but I have tried to stay just ahead of the curve by knowing what the latest and greatest treatments are, what the new findings are. And of course, I'm not a neurologist, but I try to never be surprised by a symptom or how to treat it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm the same way. And I think that's just something that, we kind of learned on the way. But now me and you have a chance to help other people that were in our shoes, back in 96, 97, 98 when we were diagnosed. And I don't want anybody to have that feeling, because I understand what it's like. It's terrible. It's a extreme toll on your mental health.
Absolutely.
And it's scary. And but I don't want people to be afraid of this disease because it's not the end of life. You can still you can do many, many great things for a long time. And I know that you worked for a long time with your diagnosis. So, I mean, talk about that. I mean, talk about how it ended up taking away your career and how you pushed yourself to work and, you didn't let MS stop you.
Sure. My college degree was in broadcast communications. And after college, I moved to Atlanta. I went to work for a major news network in Atlanta. And my husband and I had met before I moved to Atlanta. And so we did long distance for several years. And so when I did get diagnosed, my neurologist said he thought I'd had it for a while, but how would I notice? Because I would work 10, 12 hours in Atlanta and get off work and drive straight to North Carolina, 5 hours to see him every week.
Yeah.
And he would come down there on his days off. So my career was in broadcasting. So when we got married, I had gotten promoted at work and I was going to be traveling the world and kind of editing on the fly, wherever news happened.
Right.
So I didn't want to start a marriage that way. So I moved to North Carolina and I was like, well, I'll just interview back at television stations, locally. And I did get offers from most of the stations here, but it was the salary was too low. And so I ended up went through a temporary agency, and I was working for the largest apparel company in the world. And I liked it, but it was still not television and not where my degree was. And so the boss that I was working under asked me to come on full time and said, you can go and you can work into our communications department. And I was like, oh, great, because you'll be doing, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, that's a transition. That's not what I thought, but that's going to be great. So I took the job, and I don't know, less than a month later, they disbanded the communications department. But I stayed there for my entire career, and I went into marketing instead. And I ended up loving it. I did marketing promotions, but I was one person doing the same job as people in other divisions.
Right.
And so I feel like I don't feel like I did. I did work 50, 60 hours a week almost every single week. Yeah. And I wouldn't take vacations until the end of the year after everything, sold in and shipped and whatever. And so I worked all the time. And as my disease started progressing some, I started falling and losing my balance. And then I started using a cane. But I still was working with a cane, no big deal. And then I had gotten where I had to use a walker sometimes, but also, again, no big deal. And I just worked and worked and worked. And I didn't know it at the time, but I would be in a lot of pain, and I would sleep in the bathtub in the hot water at night. so I could get through the day at work, which now looking back, I'm like, what was I thinking?
Yeah. Not the safest of things to be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Not really. But my neurologist called me in one day and asked me if I had a good day at work. And I was like, yeah, of course I did. And he's like, good, you're not working anymore. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you're done. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I've tried to hint for 2 years that you probably should look into disability. And I was like, no, I'm not disabled. He's like, I didn't say you're disabled. I think you're not ever going to slow down working. So I'm going to do it for you. And so I was devastated at first, but then I realized within 2 weeks, he made 100% the right decision because I could be a better mother. I could be a better wife. I could be a better person. I could have a life of my own, like just not sleeping in the bathtub. Because how I didn't drown. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I was way better after that.
Yeah. But again, the part on your mental health, it had to be a hard thing to go through. But it's and that's the part, and that's the part that a lot of people just don't understand about us. Dealing with chronic diseases is it's not like we don't want to work, but it's our body is telling us that you're not going to be able to work, but we have to fight that battle in our head, and that's a tough battle. To deal with. How did you deal with the mental part of that? Like, just saying, I'm done. I gotta listen to my body.
I didn't accept it at first, and that's not like me. Like, I'm always going to listen to my doctor and do what he suggests, and I love my neurologist, but he didn't give me a choice. He literally handed me a letter that was, take it to the office right now and tell him you're done. And I'm like, in 2 weeks? He's like, no, like now. And so I didn't know who I was without a career. I'd worked so hard. I'd started working really young every day, like I was babysitting. And then I got my first job at 15 and I just said always work. So I was like, who am I? And so I actually went to counseling. And I talked to my preacher and I went to counseling. So I did a combination of both. And it was hard to accept at first, but within 2 weeks, I was taking like only a couple pills a day where I had been taking like 18 pills a day. So things like that. And I was sleeping in the bed, not the tub, things that made a huge difference in my life. And we had adopted a son. And so I was able to spend more time with him. And he was 7 when we adopted him. So he was, getting older and I wanted to spend time with him. He played travel ball. I could, do anything like that, but I was missing out on that stuff when I was only working because all my energy was went into work, a career. And so after counseling, I figured out who I was without a job, without a career. And I would recommend it for anybody. It's just, especially just having MS period. It was the first time I'd really talked about what it means to be diagnosed with something chronic. It changes you.
It's a life changer. Every aspect of your life from the date of that diagnosis has changed. I tell people all the time, when I was 27 years old and when I got diagnosed, my dreams were, I was going to work for the federal government. I was going to be living in, different states all over the country. But when you get that diagnosis, you got to hit the brakes and go, okay, wait a minute. I got to reassess everything and think this thing through because now I got a disease and, so you got to adjust things to make it fit for you for the rest of your life every day.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I say a lot now is nobody plans to get sick when they grow up. Nobody says, when I grow up, I want to have MS and I want to have all these symptoms and name the symptoms, whatever. But it's our reality. And so our reality is that we have something that affects our life. It affects not only our life, but the life of people that love us and care about us. And so, you can't, like I said, I was so active before. I'm not active like that anymore because I can't be, but I've found different, I have a new normal. I have a new goals, new everything. It just, you have to sit down and reevaluate and is it important to me to work 60 hours a week or is it important to me to have a good balance between home life and work life? And to not progress with my illness immediately, like have more years where I'm fine. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, you just constantly weighing things. And now, I mean, I'm 26 years in, I will sit there. I mean, I've gotten rid of any clothes that button, zip, snap.
Yeah.
Like I've changed all these things in my life just to make it easier on myself. So I have more energy to do things. I finally, after 9 years, got a parking pass, which took me forever for him to convince me to get handicap parking. Mm-hmm. That helped me when I did that. And I mean, just things like not having to button my clothes seems so simple.
Yeah.
But they make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And even in my bathroom now, I have an automatic hand dispenser for soap because it's just easier than pump. I mean, those little things of energy that you would never have thought of in your life, they add up big time when you have something like this.
Yeah. And I always encourage people, when they're very young in this disease, like in their 20s or something, and they're like, they're going out, they want to buy their first house. So, and if their mobility's good, they're thinking for that period of time now. They're not thinking for 20 years down the road. And I always say, you know what? Go with a ranch. It's a flat level, because you'll thank me 20 years from now because I made that same mistake. I went and got a colonial my first house. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. But there's things that early on in the diagnosis start preparing for later on. Right now, even if you're good, just start preparing for it. Whether it's
for the what ifs, because you don't ever know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what if you're 100% fine and you go 20 years and then you finally get a symptom, but it's one where you can't walk up the stairs anymore? You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not trying to sound scary, but you do have to it's your brain and your spine. So it can be anything. And it's been a ton of things for me, probably for you too. Yeah. And we adapt and we get through it and we're fine. You have to think about these things. And thank God my mother-in-law was a nurse because she had the wherewithal to say, you should stop looking at houses with stairs and look at a ranch. And she actually found a ranch and a home. They were having a open house, and told us to go to it. And so we came to it, which of course there's still downstairs, but downstairs now is the garages, the man cave, and the laundry room.
Yeah.
And so I haven't been downstairs in, I don't know, a decade. That just means my husband does the laundry and I don't get to see his man cave, which I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and you're fine with that.
Everything else is on main level. Our bedrooms are on the same level as our kitchen, as the living room, everything. So
and I love that. I love that you thought about that. Early in your disease, you were smart. I mean, I didn't do that, but I've already been through 3 houses. But I mean, I know that now. You need to think early, and I love that. And there's another thing that I know, and before we started recording, another thing that I love that you did, and I want to make sure that everybody hears this, is because I didn't do it. I was stupid, and I wish I would have done it. But I want you to talk about like when you went out on disability, and because it affects everybody's finances. I mean, you go from making you go from making $70,000 a year, you're going down to disability $30,000 or $20,000, whatever it pays out.
Exactly.
But you were smart enough to think about that, and please tell me how you prepared for that.
Sure. When I started working at this past job, I got it, right when I started and got my benefits, they asked me if I wanted to buy into long-term disability. And I was like, nah, I mean, I was extremely active. I was very fit. And I was like, no, I don't think I need that. And then it was like 25 cents a month. And I started thinking about it. I was like, wait, there's so many people in my family have had cancer. And what if I get cancer? And and I just kept going back and forth. I was like, 25 cents a month, let's just do it.
Yeah.
And I did, thank God, because then once I had to go on disability, I also had salary for long-term disability. And so because of having both government disability and long-term disability, I was able to stay in our home, to keep our cars,
huge.
It's not a ton more. You still have way less of an income than you did have.
Yes.
But it's still enough that you shouldn't have to change your lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I don't care whether you're prone for MS or anything, I think everybody should buy into it because it's just worth it.
And I can't emphasize that more, that how right you are. Cause like I said, I didn't do that, and I regret it every day because my salary income dropped drastically when I went on disability, and I didn't have that little extra buffer that you did. And that's just so smart that you did that. And I would advise anybody, if your company offers, long-term disability, don't turn it down.
No. And usually it doesn't cost a lot.
Yeah.
And even if it does, I think it's worth it. And you may never use it, just like you may never use any insurance.
Right.
But the likelihood is you will at some point, use your insurance. And what if you do have to use your long-term? I didn't think at 26 years old I needed to worry about my health for when I was 66 or 56. And now I'm getting ready to be 52, and I do need to think about it still. I mean, I'm so thankful. Oh gosh, I'm so thankful because it would have changed everything.
Yeah.
We would have had to move. We would have had to get rid of one of our cars.
Yeah.
I'm thankful.
I mean, it was a huge, great decision on your part. I would definitely pat yourself on the back on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But it was out of fear for my, what my family has. I never had a clue about MS, but my beliefs, again, the Lord did. So I'm just thankful. I'm thankful that I have it and could stay here.
Yep, absolutely. So you said that I know you said back in the beginning that you were just newly married when you got your diagnosis, and then you said that you ended up adopting your son. Take us through like how your husband and your son accepted your diagnosis and how they've kind of helped you along the way, and how that path has gone.
Sure. Okay, so my husband is, I don't want to call him a child, but he is like a big kid. He doesn't stress. He doesn't get upset. He's just as even keel, easygoing as I get, which is not how I am. Anyway, when I came home and I found out it was actually multiple sclerosis, I was by myself when I got the actual diagnosis. But I came home and I asked him to sit down on the bed, and he sat down, and I was like, do you actually know what it is now? And he's like, what is it? I said, it's multiple sclerosis. And he dropped his head, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to cry. I haven't cried. If he cries, I'm going to cry. You have all these thoughts going through your head.
Yeah.
Can he take it? What's going to happen? Is my not even a year marriage getting ready to split up? Yeah. And he kept his head down for a second, and he looked up, and he's like, well, at least we'll get good parking. And I just started cracking up, and he's like, no, I'm sorry. If you want to cry, we'll cry. If you want to laugh, I just thought we would laugh like we do with everything.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the approach we took to it. And things through the years, like I had to start using a wheelchair, and I came home and I was like, I need to be in a wheelchair all the time. And he was like, oh my gosh, like he acted excited. And I was like, what the heck? He's like, it's going to be so much easier to push you down the stairs now.
Oh my gosh.
Just everything like that, we've had to just kind of crack up. But he's, he still works full time. Mm-hmm. But my son, we adopted at 7. He only ever knew me with MS. So there was never a period where he knew like the healthy exercising Brenna before me.
Yeah.
So from the first day we met him, I taught him about giving myself injections, and I taught him how to do them, and I asked him if he wanted to give me one. And so immediately, within the first week, he was very comfortable with needles and with giving me my injections, and he helped me so much. And then to the point where after high school, he became my full-time caregiver.
Oh, wow.
Because my health had declined, and I stopped, working by that point, and he did everything. He took me to all my doctor's appointments, took me and went in with me, and then he helped me dress. He helped everything. He's helped me. I can't even tell you, such a good caregiver.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then, I know, he had the nerve to get married this year. And so
oh my God, how dare you?
He got married and moved out, got a life of his own. So now my husband is the primary caregiver, but my husband's still working. Mm-hmm. So I don't have that constant here to, help me open a bottle or the little things I need here and there. But obviously I'd rather him be married and have a life of his own, but
Sure.
you don't realize how much somebody helps you till they're not around, and then you're like, wow, they did a lot.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's been an adjustment, but he was, I always called him my doctor. He was just such a bright light, and he still is, but
Yeah.
he and I are away now, so.
That's just so awesome that your husband and your stepson is just like a embrace to the disease, because a lot of people don't have that, and they're going through divorces or they're not talking to their family anymore. I just hear horror stories, and I just love the fact that you got that close knit, and they got your back. That's awesome, Brenna.
I think my son is so much like my husband, and he takes cues from Jeff, who's my husband, and for Jeff not to stress and Jeff to be so cool with everything and just, laid back and doesn't stress. I think that helped pave the way for Daniel to be like, God's got it. I'm not going to worry about it. And so he just hasn't. And I haven't wanted anybody to ever worry about me before in my life, so I definitely don't want him to about MS,
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, yes, I need help now, but I don't need people stressing over me.
Yeah.
Because I'm not stressing. Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah. You're such a strong lady.
Thank you.
And talk a little bit, and because I'm still in relapse remit, so I'm not into that next phase. But kind of tell me about the transition part, like when you were at relapse remit and now you went to secondary progressive, and and how that affected your life. Because when you were in relapse remit, you were still working, you were still able to ambulate, you were with a cane or a walker, and then how did they end up taking you to the next level?
I had noticed that things were starting to progress, and so in my head, I was like, I feel like I feel like I've switched degrees of MS now, but I didn't say anything. My neurologist didn't say anything. He could see it, but it went on probably for a year like that, where I had started using a wheelchair, and then one day the lower half of my body quit working completely, like nothing. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't hold myself up. I couldn't walk. I couldn't do anything. And so he told me to go to the emergency room and told me which hospital to go to. And when I went, he had a bunch of doctors waiting for me when I got there, and they immediately took me in, and they were like, we're going to give you steroids, which helped tremendously, tremendously.
Right.
And, but instead of sending me home after the steroid infusions, they admitted me, and they kept me for a month. And within the month, I did physical therapy and learned to walk again. I did occupational therapy and learned to use my hands again. I did speech therapy and learned to swallow better. Not that my speech was a little slurry, but I didn't know speech therapy wasn't just for speech. It helped me with swallowing and stuff like that. And so I continued those therapies after I got out of the hospital. But while I was in the hospital, they discovered things like my bladder had kind of quit working, and so I ended up having to get a catheter, which at the time I was devastated. And I was like, I don't want, a bag of urine taped to my leg, whatever.
Yeah, right.
It's so much better because you're emptying your bladder all the time. And so the things you get so scared about, like wheelchair and stuff like that, have been like, oh, those help me so much. I have freedom because I have a wheelchair. I have freedom because I have a catheter. It's crazy that the things that scare you the most, that you worry about the most, end up being just nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you don't get upset and mourn the loss, but I'm not mourning the loss of my bladder. I'm just,
No, I totally get that, Brenna. I'm to the point where, it's been suggested to me by doctors, to do a self-cath and all that, and I just, I can't do it. I'm hard-headed with that, but I know that there probably will be a day where I'm going to have to be cathed, and I'll be okay with it. I just don't. I can't do it to myself. I don't know.
And I couldn't either. Well, I don't have the dexterity anymore in my hands to do it, for one thing, but it wasn't even an option because I didn't know my bladder had pretty much quit completely working. Yeah. And so they didn't want me to rely on being able to cath when my hands were, able. And so they did it's called a suprapubic catheter, but it attaches inside your bladder and a balloon inflates, and then it never comes out. Like, you don't ever have to touch it until the next month. You have to get it replaced. I mean, they'll take that one out and put a new one in. It doesn't even take numbing cream. It takes nothing. You just lay on the table and they do it. And it's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but it's no big deal.
Yeah.
But then that's all I have to do is make sure I go to the bathroom like every 2 hours and empty my bag.
Yeah.
And at night you have an overnight bag you can switch to if you want to.
Yeah.
But
And like you said, it made your life easier, and I get
absolutely.
it. I mean, I know that there will be, possibly a day where I'll be in your shoes, and I kind of prepare myself for that day, because it might happen. Of course,
you being relapsing, you may never. I mean,
I may never.
My sister has relapsing, and I hope she never becomes.
Yeah.
She has like a secondary progressive diagnosis, but she's not as far along in her disease. Like, she doesn't have the complications that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God. But, and hopefully you won't either. And it's that way for a lot of people. They don't ever get to a certain level of disability. They have problems.
Right.
And they have symptoms, but they don't become like severely disabled or even
absolutely.
heavily disabled. I mean, I have a ton of stuff wrong, and I don't even think of myself as being really disabled.
Yeah.
I guess in theory I am, but mentally, I don't feel like I am.
I mean, I'm the same way. I don't even like admitting. Even though I know I'm disabled, I don't even like admitting it because, in my head, I'm not. I think it's a little bit of an attitude that I have, and I think that you have too. Like, hey, just because we have MS and we've had it for this long, we're still human beings, and we can still.
It just doesn't define us.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the thing. I think there's so many people let it define them. Mm-hmm. There's more to me than MS. There's more to you than MS. I haven't known you that long, but what I know, like, you're a good husband. You're a good person. Like, you're doing great work doing this podcast, and just the things that you're sharing with people that may be afraid or may be newly diagnosed is amazing.
It
gives you even more purpose.
Yeah, it's everybody has some kind of gift that they could still give. It doesn't matter, what it is. You just got to find it, and I just encourage people to never give up with this disease. You can't give up. You got to keep fighting, because it basically, I think it wants you to give up. I just refuse. I refuse to do it.
No, no way.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, again, for me personally, anything bad that's happened, like MS, is from the devil. And I trust that God has allowed it for his purpose. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to be like, oh, I wish I didn't have it. No, I'm going to figure out what I can do to help other people because of it.
Yep.
Not in spite of it, but because of it.
Absolutely.
How can I use this negative to be a positive for other people, even for myself, but mostly for other people, because I don't need help mentally. I don't need help like figuring it out. If he's got it, I don't need to worry about it. I'm not stressing.
Yep.
So now how can you use me? How can I be used to help Jane and John and whomever?
Yep. I love it, Brenna. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. I really want to thank you. I think you have so much. You have so much good information. I love talking to people. I love talking to people that have had this disease around the same length as me, because it's just, we have so much in common as far as our war stories and battles with this disease. Everybody's MS is different, but a lot of our battles are very similar. Whether it's the vision or and it's just great knowing that I can pick up the phone and talk to somebody that really gets it, like you do. And like I said, I really appreciate you helping me spread.
Thank you so much.
Oh yeah. I really help you, thank you for helping me spread awareness about this disease. And if you have any kind of questions for me or Brenna, go ahead and leave them down in the comments section, or you can message me on Instagram or my Facebook account, MS Michigan Man 64. And the next time, and don't forget to hit the follow, subscribe button on the podcast, whether you're watching it on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. And this is the MS Michigan Man 64. I am out until my next podcast.